Field.
Field, singular.
Mhm.
Start again. Winnie Field, November 20th, 2000, at the WCBTV studios in Brandon, Manitoba. Can you tell us your name and where you grew up?
My name is Winnie Field, Winnifred actually, but I think that's stuffy, so I say Winnie. And I grew up in Stepney, London, the east end of London, England. And I came to Canada in '46 as a war bride.
How old were you when the war started?
I think I was around 17, something like that. And I was working.
How did life change for you then when the war started?
Oh, well, it changed a lot because you saw so much. Like for a year, it was fine. I mean, we thought, but then once the bombing started, it was a change of life. We had the Anderson shelter in the garden, and you know, you'd go to work in the morning, and then you'd come home and you'd take your tea, as we called it then, or supper here, down to the shelter, and then you were stuck there, and then they'd start bombing around 8 o'clock and go all night until you got the all clear in the morning. But when they first started bombing, it was on a Saturday afternoon, and nobody knows how terrific or how horrible it is, because it's something that you don't know, that you've never witnessed before. And that's why when I see it on TV, I can't watch it, because it's devastating. Because, you know, it goes on, and they bombed for about 4 hours all afternoon, because you see Stepney is near the East End docks, and this is what they were after, the boats that were in. And then they came back, and fires everywhere, and then they came back around 8 o'clock at night, and then they were bombing by the light of their own fires. And actually, at the time, Britain didn't have anything, because you see there'd been a tract or something to do with the peace thing, and no country was supposed to have be armed, you know, whereas Germany had been building it up as from about 32, 36. But then after a while you felt, well, why am I sitting here all the time? If I'm going to die, you know. So, as I say, Hitler never stopped me from skating, dancing, or swimming. And that was it.
So you'd go out as normal?
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
And then at night come back to the
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there was one time, I've told this story before, but my sister and I, we went to a show. It was at the Odeon on Commercial Road. And I couldn't tell you to this day what the film was about. It was, well, I can tell you it was a Navy film about, you know, the Navy. And during the film, on the left-hand side, or on the film rather, that came on, air raid in progress. We heard the sirens. And then it went on, and then a Molotov cocktail, which was a basket done up like with a parachute on, and it was full of explosives, like fire bombs. And it came down on the left side of the screen. Well, you know, people started screaming and yelling, and the firemen, they got them, and they were running with their hoses down each aisle, because there were 3 blocks of seats. And people started, well, there was one soldier, I'll never forget it as long as I live. He stood up on the seat, and he yelled at the top of his voice. He said, "Shut your bleating noise." And he said, "I've been waiting 3 bleating months," he said, "for this leave and to see this film, and I'm going to see it. If you want to go, go. If not, sit down and shut up." Took the panic right away. But my sister and I, it still gets me. But my sister and I, we left the theater, and it was just like daylight outside. with the fires and the bombing still going on. And of course you had to be very, very careful of the shrapnel, because you know the bombs would explode and it blew the shrapnel all over the place. And by the time we got home, we knew something was wrong, because the front door was off its hinges, and we had quite a long passageway to the stairs and then another passageway into the kitchen. And it was just like the rocky road to Dublin, because everything was all upheaved and doors were off, windows were blown in. And we went down the shelter. My mother was in hospital at the time. And we went down the shelter, and my brother and my dad were down there, and of course they'd been going out of their minds, you know, with us not being home. And anyway, Daddy gave us a big hug, and he was so happy to see us. And I said, what happened? And he said, we don't know. But a landmine, and they had a quarter of a mile radius, and it had dropped four streets over. So it raised everything for, you know, that, and so we had to, the house was like knocked down after a few years, but you couldn't live there anymore because it was too shaky. But you know, it was funny because at the corner of the street, Haley Street it was, there was a big Anglican church, St. John's, and we'd been christened and married, and my sisters and the whole family went there. And you know, that didn't get touched. Never. It was so strange. And then up on the commercial road, there was what we called Victoria Palace. Now, this was a very poor part of London I'm talking about. And that was where Queen Victoria, she had it built so she could get away from all the practical and be amongst what she called her people for a certain time of the year. And it was a beautiful place, great big gates and the whole bit. And in the front, there was a big statue of her. And then inside the palace, there was the bust of her. And you know, no matter what happened, those things never came down. But so we always used to say, well, old Vic's looking after old Vic's looking after us. But it was, you know, so strange, these little things that happen, you know.
Where did you go once you couldn't live at home anymore?
Well, it was really bad because one sister lived in one part of London, Poplar, and the other one lived in North Edmonton. That was another, yeah, oh yes, a grown family. And so my dad and brother, it was the first time in all their years of marriage that my mum and dad were separated. And my dad and brother went to live with my sister Irene, and myself and Elsie and my mum, we went to live with my sister Lil in Edmonton. And it was heartbreaking time, you know, to be separated, you know, but you couldn't get a house or anything, so it was something you had to do. And then anyway, things didn't work out with me, and so my dad, love his heart, he'd been 22 years in the Navy. He had the DSM, and yeah, he was a very, very wonderful man. And he said to me, well, he said, he said, why don't you join the army? So I said, I don't want the army. So he said, well, join the Navy. It was to get me out of the house, because otherwise I think I'd have killed my sister-in-law. But anyway, I couldn't get in the Navy. I was too short at that time. And then I thought, well, I'd go. My dad said, well, they're wanting drivers. So I went into the army thinking I was going to be a driver. You know, I could see myself driving the old generals and colonels around. But instead of that, I couldn't go in because you had to be 5'4", and I was only 5'1.5". So that squashed that. So I went into the artillery, and we were on the artillery sites, what they called the static sites. And we were usually surrounded by big guns, which were 3.7s, 4.5s. And when those suckers went off, I'm telling you, it was a lot of noise. So, but it was good, really. And actually, I sometimes think we're guided in a certain way because I think it prepared me for being away from home to come to Canada, that I never thought was in the making. But it was so strange because one time before the war, and my sister and I, we were at South, I think it was South End, either there, yeah, it was either there or Brighton. And we went to for a lark, we went to this fortune teller. And she had it mapped out like you'd never believe. Yep. She said, you'll be married, but you won't marry an Englishman, you'll marry a foreigner. She said, and then go to a foreign country. Or something like that, you know. And of course, we came out there laughing like crazy. But I'm telling you, it came off.
What was life like every day then in the army? Were you living with other women?
Oh, yes, yeah. The women were on one side of the barracks and the men were on the other. But, you know, but there was no fraternizing, actually, because when you're 18, 19, well, a man of 40 at that time, 45, I mean, they were ancient, you know. And they were the only ones we were stuck with because they were too old to go overseas. But then, you know.
How did they treat you?
Oh, just like kids. Just like kids, you know. We got so fed up with them saying, well, I've got a daughter your age. Wow, you stick it in your ear. You know. So you couldn't really do much about it. But no, they were really good. And, you know, when we used to go out at night, there was nowhere to go, so we used to go in the pub, and they'd always watch out for us. Yeah, yeah. They wouldn't bother us, but if anybody started coming on to us and they thought it was a bit strong, they'd walk up and say, well, mate, how you doing? Leave them alone or else. And then about 4 more would come up. So they really, we didn't have to worry at all, really.
Oh, well, it's getting all...
Do you want me to take these off?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's okay, love. Was that kind of... I keep forgetting.
So, tell me how you met your future husband.
Well, it was in a pub. We had it was called the Sun. It was right across from where we lived. It was a family pub. And my mum had met him prior, and I didn't know this prior to my meeting him. And she just gave him my life story, who I'd been with, who I hadn't been with, and the whole bit. And and then this one Saturday night, I was home because I went on compassionate leave because Mum had been sick. And we went into the pub, and he was there, and he was on his own, and he came over, and so Mum introduced us. He said, "Oh, this is a nice young man I saw the other night." And that. And so anyway, he got, you know, he wasn't feeling any pain. And so before we left, he said to me, I'll take you out tomorrow. Because I looked at him, I was disgusted. I said, you're drunk. Yeah, I know, he said, but I'll still take you out tomorrow. And I said, yes, if you remember, no, if you don't. And with that, I walked out the pub. And he wouldn't, and then the next night, my sister, Lil, said, he's pretty all right. So I said, oh, shut up. So, because I was the baby and I was spoiled. And so anyway, I said, I'm not going to bother. Well, it was dark the next night, and he didn't come to the house, but my sister kept looking out, and she could see this cigarette. And she said, he's over there. So I said, well, I said, he can come to the house. I said, I'm not going over there. So, of course, one of my other sisters said, oh, you can't leave the poor sod over there all on his own. I said, yes, I can. So anyway, Lil went over and brought him in. And we had a nice evening. And then he said, how long are you on leave? And I said, I really don't know. I said, as long as Mum's sick, I am. And So anyway, we started going together then, and we just continued. And then it was the Christmas of 43, yeah, we were married in 44. And we had a house party like we always did. And he said, I'm going to marry you. And I gave him the same answer, yes if you remember, and no if you don't. Well, he remembered, and I'm glad he did, because otherwise I wouldn't have had the wonderful life I've had out here with 4 kids. So, yeah.
We should mention what had brought him overseas. What area was he?
He was in the Royal Service Corps, and he was hoping to join his brother, Jonas, who was in with the Italian campaign, but he had got a bad ear infection, and not demoted, I can't think of I can't think of it, but well, they declassified him, so, and you had to be A to go over.
So what kind of duties did he have?
Well, he was mostly in office at that time, so...
So you were able to see each other?
Oh, yes, yeah, and then I was stationed. I went back, but I was stationed near home anyway. And then he went, he was stationed at Leatherhead in Surrey. And I was on weekend leave, so I went down there. It was just outside London. And there were him and his sergeant and 3 others living in this great big mansion. I think there was about 24, 30 rooms, beautiful countryside. And anyway, I was late catching the train, and we missed it. It was just fun. And I said, what am I going to do now? And he said, I'll go and ask the sergeant if you can put up at the house. There was no beds or anything. They were sleeping on the floor. And as we were walking to the manor, I looked up and there was this plane with all the flames shooting out of the rear, the tail end. And I said to the Clifford, what on earth is that? And it was your first buzz bomb. Yeah, and as it went right over, and then all of a sudden the engine cut out, and then they would go right down. And there was they went at such a speed. And so this is why I was stationed near London, because we were, the army was hoping to stop them. And but there was one thing to them, you could hear them coming, so you could dive for cover. But the V2, you couldn't. That was a missile with no sound that they used. I guess they use them now to a good degree. And so the way they combated that was, thank God for the Air Force, was they used to meet them coming over like the Dover or somewhere, wherever they came from. And then it was a very, very tricky thing, because sometimes we used to be stationed with our outfits along the shoreline, and they used to get the wing. See, they had to be on course, and they used to get their wings and tip it. And once it tipped it, down it went into the sea. So, it was very, 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 very dangerous. But the boys at that time, they did it, and it was just wonderful.
It's hard to imagine what you would be thinking every day. Were you and Clifford in touch every day, even if you couldn't see
Oh,
him?
no, we weren't.
So days would go by and
Yes.
you wonder if he was okay and he was hurt.
Yeah, well, that's it, yeah.
And that's just the way it went.
Well, a lot of it was a way of life. Like, as I said, we used to sit home. We sat home for a long time, and then, well, why not, go out and enjoy yourself? So we did. And, I mean, if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. I mean, nowadays I don't look at it like that, but at that time, there was no dying. And if there was, well, that was the way, But I'll tell you something, too. There's a camaraderie, even in a civilian street, at that time, that you'll never get otherwise. Like, you could be walking along, and then a truck, well, we used to call them what? Not trucks, lorries. I forget. And they'd stop, pile everybody in the back if the buses weren't going, you know, and just take you to work, and you know, whereas in Civvy Street you wouldn't get that. And no, I mean, it's a dreadful, dreadful thing, war. But there's a lot of things that come out of it, like a lot of the physio now, and you're, you know, repairing the face from burns. That was all attributed, came out during the Second World War, because some of the airmen, they just came back roasted, and they just built them up. Well, it's the same way with the Army and the Navy, but they just built the faces and this kind of thing. Yes, well, this is it. But then then that was when they got it, because pre-war you never saw anything like that.
Tell us about your wedding.
Oh, well, we prior to the wedding, Hitler had been playing up, and it was raining. It had been raining for a few nights, and then we were married in a church. It was 500 years old. It was near where I lived. And they said, now I don't know, but there were underground valleys through there. Not valleys, what do you call them? Tunnels, that's it, yeah. And they say the tunnels used to go from North Edmonton right the way underground, and off from the church there was the most beautiful gardens you ever saw. They were called the Rose Gardens, and there were every type of roses in the world, and they never, you know, they were always taken care of, and they always used to say that Queen Elizabeth, that was one of her getaway spots. Now whether it was true or not, I don't know, but it you know, it could have been. And it was a beautiful old church, but I must give you a little story here. My brother was Clifford's best man, and of course I was a baby, he was about 17 years older than I. And they were walking down towards the church. And Bill stopped, my brother, and he said to Clifford, he said, I'll give you the opportunity, mate. He said, that way's the ball and chain. He pointed to the church. He said, and that way's freedom. He said, I'm going to turn my back and you now I came from the craziest family. And Clifford said, oh no, he said, I've been near, you know, I've been this close before. He said, I'll take a chance on this. But there is one thing I must say too, and that is when I came to Canada, I thought the Canadian women were so very clever. They did everything, and the canning and the garden and sewing. I mean, I never knew any of that, and I just thought it was wonderful. And then there was one day I was sitting in the kitchen at the Pines, and the phone rang, and my mother-in-law, she was out at the garden. I was the only one in the house. And so I went and answered it, and this voice said, Mrs. Field, and I said, yes. Well, there's going to be a shower tonight. And with that, they hung up. Oh, 8 o'clock. And I thought, my gosh. So I was sitting there, and I guess I had a look of, you know, on my face. And Cliff came in with his mum, and he said, what's the matter? Well, I said, you know, I said, I really think that Canadian women are wonderful. But to tell what the weather's going to be, and because we didn't know showers. Now that sounds far-fetched, but it's true. And so, of course, you know, his mother said, what happened? And I said, well, there was a phone call, and this lady said there's going to be a shower at 8 o'clock tonight. And I'm sitting there like a nut waiting for it. And then, of course, all these cars came in. But neither of them told me what the shower was, because it was a surprise. But so you never know, really.
Were you thinking, what were your thoughts about when you and Clifford decided to get engaged? What were your thoughts about going overseas?
Wonderful.
You looked forward to
Yes. Yeah, really. I mean, oh, well, that was another adventure. I mean, when you're... And the thing is, too, I think we were so much younger in some ways than the young people of today of that age. You know, it was another adventure, oh, sure, you know. And because my dad, he said, well, he said, you may as well go and see how the other half of the world lives. But if he'd have said to me, I don't want you to go, I wouldn't have come. No, but no, it never bothered me at all. It didn't, and I don't think it bothered most of us until we got to Liverpool. And we each had a nurse, like Susan was not quite a year old. And we each had a nurse carrying the baby. And as we were walking, I saw the ship, and it suddenly dawned on me. You know, I'm not going to be able to come back on the weekend.
Did your family come with you?
No, we couldn't. They couldn't. And so anyway, I started to cry, and the nurse said to me, "What's the matter?" And I said, if I had 2 pins, I'd turn around and go home. And at that time, they used to wear the bibbed apron in Britain, the nurses, and they used to have the pins to keep the bib up. And she said to me, well, I've got 2 pins, she said, but there's no way, she said, that I could let my bib fall and give them to you. And I sometimes wonder what would have happened if she hadn't done. But anyway, we got on the ship. And
Now, is Clifford with you?
No.
It was 1946?
No, he was here.
He had gone back
Yeah.
after the end of the war?
Yeah.
He had gone
Mhm.
back right away?
Yeah, he was here. No, he didn't come back right away. He was here, I think, about 8 months or so before I came over.
Okay.
And but no, there wasn't many of us that were met. Like they had this war brides picture on TV. And one of the, at the War Bride Convention, reunion, one of them said, oh, I watched it. I thought it was wonderful. And I said, well, I watched it about 15 minutes and I'd had enough. So she said, well, why? I said, well, you met at the station? And then I asked her, no. I said, but in that film, all the husbands were there and hugging kissing their wives. I said, I remember getting off in Winnipeg. I said, and there were very, very few. Well, I mean, there wasn't the money to travel, and you know, there wasn't any. I don't think there was any certain time that the train would get in. So, and then I had a terrible time because I don't think anybody knew where Pelly was. So first of all, I don't know what they were going to do with me, but they kept changing my route. So in the finish, one of the Knights of Columbus, they were overall look after us. He came up and he said, Mrs. Field, he said, you'll be getting off in Winnipeg. So, oh, that's fine. Well, I mean, Winnipeg could have been in Timbuktu for all I knew. So we get off at Winnipeg, and then they tell me that I would be going to Humboldt, Saskatchewan, staying there for 2 days, and then getting the train back to Pelly. Well, by that time, I was going nuts. I was all on my own with the baby, and Susan was very, very sick. Most of the children were terribly sick on the train journey with diarrhea and dysentery. They were really bad. But anyway, I said, where's Humboldt? Well, they didn't. So I thought, oh, so I nearly cried again. I thought, no, I've cried enough. But and then I will say the Red Cross, they sent the cars and picked us up and took us to a big hostel in the Red Cross hostel. I don't know whether it's still there in Winnipeg. And you see, my husband, he was going with a girl in Winnipeg on Sherbrooke Street. And so I said to this chap, it was a big station wagon, and I said to him, do we go by Sherbrooke Street? And he said, yes. And I said, well, he said, you know somebody there? And I said, yeah, my husband's old flame lives there. So anyway, when we got to the hostel, there were women there to look after the children, and then they took most of the war brides shopping. So this man, he said to me, do you know the name? And I said, yeah, Anderson. Do you know where they live? And I said, yeah, because, you know. And so he looked it up and he said, would you like to go? So I said, yeah. So anyway, I went to see her. And well, she was beautiful. She really was lovely, Chrissy. And they were so nice, so very, very nice. And I had Susan with me, and they sent for a doctor, and he said she was a pretty sick baby, but he said, you know, I think she'll be okay to travel. So that 10 o'clock that night, we were on the main liner in the red cap, and people, like, they had some people still in the kitchen, and you know, it was just wonderful. And so I said, so then the red cap said to me, when you get to, say, Kamsack, he said, your husband might meet the train from there, because I'd sent him a telegram to tell him about all this. And he said, you know, keep an eye out. And I said, well, how will I know when I get to Kamsack? And he said, well, you see some big red buildings. So I said, what? He said, they're elevators. And I said, oh my goodness, do they have lifts in the middle of the prairie? Well, that's so anyway, and I didn't realize that you had to, like, dress and undress in your berth. I was on the upper berth. And there was this one lady going to Humboldt, war bride, and I can't think of her name now. And so she was on the lower berth. So anyway, we slept, and then the next day came down, and I had my clothes I was going to put on. Oh, the people must have thought I was nuts. So anyway, she said, I said to her, would you hold Susan, my baby? I said, while I go and get dressed. Well, in the meantime, I just finished getting dressed when the train stopped. And the day before, when he got the telegram, one of Clifford's friends said, you know, she may be on the main liner in Kamsack. Well, my brother-in-law, had a car. So they drove to Kamsack, and when the train stopped, they said to the red cap, Clifford said, do you have any war brides aboard? And he said, yeah. He said, I got 2. Well, he took Clifford along, and Clifford looked, and he said, that's my baby, but it's not my wife. Yeah, so, I mean, it's like a TV story, but it's the honest truth. So then in the meantime, I come out of the biffy where I'd got dressed, and I always remember I had my shoes in this hand, and I had them, you know, under the van to hold them. And when I saw him, I dropped everything, and I just screamed and yelled, oh, Clifford, and run up to him. And so, you know, he put his arms around me and kissed me, and, you know, and I cried, and we were having, I'm so pleased. And then the red cap came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, ma'am, he said, we have to keep the trains on time. And I got my first standing ovation because all the passengers stood up and clapped. So anyway, we got in the car, and we were going along, and I'm looking. Clifford said, what's up? And I said, well, you know, we were told that Canada was a very friendly country. So he said, yeah. So I said, well, how come they live so far apart? I said, there's a house there, and there's not. And of course, I didn't realize it was all farmland. And so we got to the house and had something to eat. And then I said to Clifford, where are we going this afternoon? He said, well, we're not going anywhere. And I said, I want to see Pelly. So he said, there's nothing to see. And I said, well, I want to see Pelly. I couldn't stay, you know. So anyway, he got a hold of Warwick, and he said, Wynn wants to go into Pelly. And anyway, we're driving along, and all of a sudden I said, oh, this is a much friendlier place. I said, there's a house there, and there's a house there, and oh, look, there's a shop. Oh, yeah. And so, and of course, Clifford said, yeah, he said, this is Pelly, because that's what there was at the time. Post office, one cafe, and nothing else. And I said, oh, you know. So, but...
How were you received by the family?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah, you know, I mean, it was strange, but, and then because I had to correct, like, I didn't always speak like this, It was more of a go blimey, I'll get out of it way, you know. But they couldn't understand. Couldn't understand me. And one time I was, and Dan Purplock, that was the story. Your dad might remember him. He was a very popular man. He was a lovely man, and of course it was a lot of Ukrainian and Russian around there. They were lovely people. Boy, I'm telling you, if I could have done the work that they could, whew. So anyway, and this one lady, she was talking away to me. She had a very thick accent. And then she turned, after she finished talking, she looked at me and she said, I can't understand you. And I looked at her and I said, well, I said, we're having the same trouble. So, you know, and even the family, you know, so I had to sort of smarten it up a bit. And then I got in the habit of it. But every now and again, when I get mad, I really go into, oh, get out of here. The old East London way. Yeah. No, they were very, I will say, on the whole, they were really good. There was a lot of, as I say, a lot of strangeness, first of all, because my ways weren't their ways. And I had and my mother, and they could do everything. I couldn't even boil water. I had never made a dinner or a meal in my life. And so, of course, and Clifford would say to me, well, watch Mum, watch Mum. Well, I was just in the way, you know, and because she wasn't used to anything. So, but my sister-in-law, Emily, she was at Warwicksville. She was very, very good.
Did you have your own house? Or
No, we were living with, you see, the Canadian government, when we went to, for interviews, they preferred that you lived with a member or with the family, first of all, for a bit. But, and I mean, some of the girls, I guess, they had it pretty rough. Well, we all did, actually, because, I mean, I love the country. This is what Clifford couldn't get over. He said, you come from a city, but I still love the country. And it was, and so that's why we went on. He didn't want to go on the farm, but I did. But, and then we got a farm. It was 14 miles north, I think it was, of Minnetonka's. And and we built this little shack. It was 12 by 24. We had the 2 kids then. Or he built it. And then I was staying with his people. And then, you know, he came and got me. And when I saw it, I thought, my God, if my mum and dad ever saw this, I'd be on the next boat back. But anyway, and of course he hadn't finished the roof. And you see, the neighbors couldn't help him because it was harvest time. So otherwise they would have had a house building bee or whatever they call it. So you could see the stars through the slats in the roof, and there was barley coming up through and the mosquitoes. Oh. Like Clifford said to me, when you hear them dive, you know, duck your head or wait and then hit them. But to me, it was just like the bombs coming down again. Yeah, it really was. And of course, and every time they come, I'd jump so he couldn't kill them. But, it was about 2 in the morning, and I just couldn't stand it anymore. And we had Susan and Bill in bed with us because they were so bad. And we had one of the little wood stoves, you know, the ranges. And so I thought, well, I'd build a smudge. They were sleeping. And so, of course, not knowing any better, I put some paper in and then, you know, lit it and some old chips or something I found. And, of course, pretty soon, what the mosquitoes didn't do, I did, because I nearly killed them with smoke. Of course, Clifford woke up. He was cut. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm building a smudge. He said, you build a smudge outside, not inside. And then the next morning I helped him I'd never had a hammer or nail in my hand, but I helped him put the floor in, and he didn't like heights, so I was up on the roof. And when I always think that the Lord sometimes guides us to these things, because we had no matter how hard it was, we had a sense of humor with it. Oh, we used to have our fights, and we used to have some real good ones and get mad at each other and that, because life's not all serene. And and when I look back on those days, and he was sick for 20 years with Parkinson's disease, and sometimes he'd sit there grinning, and I'd say to him, "What are you grinning at?" And he'd say, "Do you remember so and so?" And then we just kill us, just laugh like crazy, and that gets you through an awful lot. It really does.
Please keep in touch with your family.
Oh yes.
And when did you go back?
The first time I went back was in '61. Yeah, and that was a fluke, actually, because they'd started the charter flights then, and I was working at the oldest Cinnabon Hospital when it was in the South End. And one of the girls, Peggy Pollock, she was Irish, war bride, and she was going back. And the mental hospital at that time got its first charter. And so Peggy, like her husband, you had to be working at the mental or be affiliated. And so Peggy's husband worked there. So she said, "Oh, I'm going home. I'm going back." And she said, "Wouldn't it be nice if you could come?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been here 15 years or something, I guess." And so she said, "Well, I'll give you the number." And it was, I don't know whether I'm supposed to mention it, but it's Lawson Travel Agency. And I think they're still in Winnipeg. So I got in touch with them. And then one morning, I was sleeping and Billy came running up, Bill, and he said, "Mum," he said, "there's a phone call from Winnipeg." Oh, I said, "Go away," because I work nights. And he said, "No, it's from Winnipeg." So I got up, and it was him. And he said they'd had a cancellation. Was I still interested? And so that's how come I went. And it was wonderful. I was treated like a movie star. We got off the plane, and of course Heathrow wasn't like it is now. It was just a small place. And they had the biggest bunch of flowers, cut flowers, to meet me with. And of course, people were looking at yeah, who's a celebrity? But it was a wonderful 3 weeks. But I was pleased to come home.
How did London change?
Oh yes, yeah, very much so. And my brother-in-law had the car, and they picked us up. And I went from the airport, and we went down the street where we lived. And where the houses had been like you see next to each other, upright, they were on the slant. Just one. There was an upstairs, they're sort of bungalow type. And I thought to myself, and then there was they were just putting the Battersea Tower up there, and there were so many tall buildings that hadn't been there before.
And your family was all there?
Yes, yeah, except my mum. My mum died in '56. I never did see her again. And then Daddy died. No, I saw Daddy again, because I went over again. And then he passed away. And I was very, very upset. That was one part of my life where I always felt, well, he's always going to be here. I guess we all do with our dads. But, and anyway, but I got a letter from my sister, Lil, and she said, "We know how you doted on Daddy and how much you loved him, but don't grieve for it, Win." She said, because unbeknownst to him, the doctor had told the family, but not my dad, he had leukemia. He was 86, but he died within 6 months. So as soon as I read that, I said, "Thank the Lord." And I didn't worry about him anymore. No, we used to, when I was in the army, we had a major, and he'd been in the battle in France, and he'd been wounded, and in a certain place, and he couldn't, there was no way he could go back on the front again. And he was military from the top of his head to the tip of his toe. And he'd get us up 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 or 4, whenever the fancy took him, for practice. And but he was Bill Robinson. That was his name, I think. And but he used to drive us nuts. So, but you had to do it, so that's all there was to it. And then you see, we were we were on, as I say, a static camp, and there used to be the Pathfinder, and then there was the projector, and no, I can't think of the instrument I was on. Isn't that something? But we used to. The Pathfinder used to pick up the planes. And then it would go to the project, and then it used to come to us. And we used to match the thing, like the little dewies on the inside. And then that would relay the message to the guns, and then they would match it up. Yeah, and this was when I was at Enfield. And that was just by Edmonton. And we got the citation for bringing down a 217 Dornier 217, and I tell you, that's whenever you if ever you get a chance to see a plane caught in searchlights, stand there and watch it. It's wonderful. It's just like a spider, getting a fly in its web. They can't, they can't, because there's around 6, and they get them right in the middle. Yes, and there's no way he's going to go. So, yeah.
I never asked you, where were you on VE Day? Do you remember?
Yes, I was home. I was in London. Clifford, he was working in London at that time, but I was just had another month to go before Susan was born, so there was no way I could be up there. But then we had a big street party, because that was something that we used to do for jubilees and big things. Everybody would bring their tables out and all the food, and the kids would all sit down, and street parties. And then it was just like a great big birthday party, wear straw hats and paper hats, and then when the tables were put away, somebody had get a couple of pianos, they'd push them out into the street, and that went on pre-war too. And we used to dance and sing, and and that was the same as with Guy Fawkes Day. They used to, like, some of the streets were still cobbled, and we used to build a great big fire, and I mean the party would go on till about 4 or 5 in the morning, celebrating the Houses of Parliament that didn't quite get blown up. Yeah.
Were you thinking that soon you'd be off to Canada at that point?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course I was corresponding with them over here too. And mind you, Clifford wasn't fussy about coming back. He wanted to stay. Yep. But then he came back, and he wrote to me and said that, he found life over here so different. And he sort of hinted that he wanted me to tell him to come back. And I said, so I showed the letter to Daddy, and my dad said, well, what do you think? And I said, I'm not going to tell him to come back. I said, if he comes back and can't get a job, well, it's all going to be my fault. So then Daddy said again, no, you should go and see. But I could understand why when I came over here, because he'd got to be more of a Londoner than, and a lot of the guys did. I mean, he had quite an accent when he came over too, but it didn't take him long to get Canadianized, really. Yeah, it's something I didn't care for much, but because to my idea, at that time, women used to yes their men quite a lot. Or they did. I mean, you very likely know this, and I guess I came from a different breed because my mum never yes my dad. And of course, and I did get into a lot of trouble because, I wasn't going to take a lot of stuff that came. So, yeah, and on the whole, like when they realised, especially my mother-in-law, that I wasn't going to be the same as my other sister, my sister-in-law, or this kind of thing, well, then they left me alone. But like one time she said to me, "You have no right talking to my son like that, or raising your voice." And of course I looked at her and I said, "There's no way," I said, "he's going to raise his voice to me without getting an answer back." Well, that was all there was to it. But no, in a way, I don't regret. I don't regret coming to Canada. I really don't, because I've loved it since. Well, you either, like my mum always had a saying, wherever you go, you hang your hat. You either, and if you want to, you like it, and you'll be happy. But if you make up your mind you don't like it, you're going to be a sad, sorry. And she always said that. And I think even now, if I had to move somewhere, that's the way I'd look at it. Because it's true. I mean, to like is a happy emotion, and to be sad is really bad, and it can be a wasted emotion, really. Yeah, this is true. Yeah, no, I was always sorry that I wasn't in on the, on VE Day in London. But then we had such a good time afterwards, so there was no way I could have made it anyway. Not with what I was carrying. but no, we, as I say, war is terrible. It really is, for the devastation and that it causes. And like, I was talking to some kids in one of the schools here, and there was one kid, he was a bit of a bully boy, and I thought, I'm going to, because I'm going to have a bit of trouble with you, because you have to be so careful what you say to kids nowadays. Raise your voice and boy, you've had the bird. And so one of them said to me, "What did you do during the war?" So I said, I was in the army for 3.5 years. Oh, so this boy said, "Oh, I'm in the army too." That was just the way he said it. So I said, "Oh, you are?" I said, "You're in the cadets." So he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I think that's wonderful." I said, "Because it teaches you discipline, teamwork." I said, "And it's really good for you." So he said, "Oh, yeah," and he was carrying on. And then he wouldn't leave it alone. And then he said, and I told him about the bombing and that, and he said, "Oh, I bet you had a good time. I bet you had a good time during the war with all that going on." Well, even now, if anybody says anything like that to me, the hair on my neck stands up. And I turned around to him and I said, "What the so-and-so?" I said, "Kind of stupid questions that." I said, "You think it's a good time?" I said, "When the bombs have come over, you go outside the next morning, there's no houses where there were." I said, "And there's arms and legs." I said, "One time they hit a stable and all these horses in bits and pieces." I said, "You think that's a good time?" And of course, he looked at me, and of course these other 5 kids up there said, "Oh, that was a stupid question." That was a stupid question. So anyway, after that we went to the common room for coffee, and I said to the teacher, I said, I may have been out of term with one of your students. So she said, "Which one?" So I said, "I don't know, but Oh, they said, "Oh, yeah, so-and-so, so-and-so." What did you say to him? So I told them exactly what I said. And they said, "Oh, if only we could say something like that." Yeah? And so, and of course, so they said, "Well, it's a good job because he was a troublemaker anyway, and if I'd have sort of glossed it over, Yes, yeah, but I do say this, and I am really sincere in this, the children of today, not that you want to tell them about it, but they have no idea of their past. They didn't know what a war bride was. And it was just after, when I started talking, that one of them said, "Oh, my granddad was in the war." And I said, "Well, what did he do?" And, and I said, do you learn this at school?" "Oh, no, my granddad, he don't like talking about it, but he told us, so I know that there was one." That's out of this world. when you think of the kids in Belgium and the kids in Holland, they have all got a graveside to keep up. And when they're too old, their kids do it. And they've never forgotten, and they still do it. And yet our kids,
You're right, because there's very little evidence.
this is the whole point. But it still should be, it still should be in the schools. Like, not the gory stuff, about the war and the heroes that were, I mean, when you think of two VCs living on the same street in Winnipeg, two ordinary, I don't think they were officers, but the both of them. One was Nobby Clark and Accountant Clark, and then they renamed the street Valor. And yet your kids don't know anything about that. I didn't know anything about that until I saw it on TV. And it's lacking. It's really, really lacking. And I think myself, it's denying the children a lot.
It's denying them their history.
Well, certainly it is. Certainly it is. Well, I've been on my soapbox long enough without it.
Yes, thank you.
Well, you're very, very welcome. And I've enjoyed it.